Yeah, the way that I've seen it in America that makes me skeptical a lot of the time is I've seen it, and obviously we're when people say, oh, the way I've seen it, like obviously I'm referring to the Andrew Yang campaign. I won't like mince words about that. I think that the way that Andrew Yang proposed UBI is popular in an American system where everybody's used to capitalism in a country that can't take care of its people, and so you're on your own. And a direct cash stimulus seems like the only possible way that you could ever get any kind of relief from the horrors and the financial stress and the constant anxiety and burden of being low income in a country that can't take care of its people and provide economically. So I don't want to make any mistake of I totally understand the rationale between $1,000 a month would totally help.
Okay, but what I would ask is, what's the chocolate laxative thing? Because you're the one that introduced me to that terminology and that train of thought. If that's Zc's terminology.
Do what? Yeah, so that's actually, I borrowed that terminology Zc actually talked about UBI way back in 2010, and it was actually when he was delivering this critique on what he called cultural capitalism, which is when he was talking about the rise and fads of things like Starbucks and Tom's Shoes, where it was essentially you were providing yourself with this escape from. So capitalism was causing all of these problems. Capitalism is the reason that kids in Africa are struggling. They don't have these shoes. But when I participate in this capitalist system, I'm absolving myself of this, issue. So it's it's in a sense, it's one thing that has the opposite effect of what it's intended to be doing. So milk chocolate is what Zizek was saying. And it's milk is would make you constipated. But in America, you can buy milk chocolate laxative, which is the milk chocolate that makes you shit. So that's what the term comes from. The reason that I have often, used it in my own, framing for UBI, and obviously, was because I thought it pertains specifically well to the Andrew Yang campaign in relation to the fact that his main argument for UBI is that it would be a replacement for social benefits for anybody that opted into using UBI. And I think that's a fundamental mistake, because I think that as people, I think you're putting people in a really tough spot if you're asking them to choose between $1,000 a month or something like food stamps or rent control or Section 8 or WIC, or if you have a wheelchair and you need to take a special kind of transportation that the government provides for you, then you wouldn't be allowed to have the UBI stimulus. Anything that would be a government benefit to you, you would no longer qualify for the UBI. And I think that when you're putting people in a position like that, where they have to make that decision, especially when people are really cash poor and they're trying to buy something that they need money for, and maybe their bank account is charging them overdraft fees, and maybe it's you need something, and so you want to have this some element of control in your life. And you obviously, the social safety net that we have in this country is abysmal and totally insufficient and not working, and has way too many holes in it that people are obviously falling through. But I worry that if you were to start bringing people off those social safety nets even more, we would see a hollowing out of those social systems, and then we would get rid of them. And if you have people taking $1,000 a month as opposed to those social systems, I think that you're going to end up seeing that people are getting even less value, especially if we don't put in national kind of protections like rent control, workplace democracy, things like that, that are going to give people, the ability to not just lose that extra $1,000 to inflation, rent increases, things like that. Those are my concerns.
Yeah. So I totally agree with that. A universal basic income under no circumstance can be instituted as a replacement for pre-existing social, safety net programs. And I will clarify too that Andrew Yang's UBI, the freedom dividend as he called it, was not necessarily at the expense of all social safety net programs.
As far as I'm understanding, as I heard him describe it,
you weren't being asked to turn in your Medicare or your Social Security if you were a senior. It was more for programs like food stamps, and the argument was that it's more dignifying to just get $1,000 a month that you can spend at your discretion, rather than here's $50 a week that you can spend at these stores on these items and no cigarettes or alcohol. You know what I'm saying?
Also Section 8.
Okay, no, I acknowledge that, but I'm just saying it's not at the expense of all.
Sure. Yeah, I think he said it was 120 social services that he was willing to cut.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, as far as the big ones, it wasn't. Just to clarify, I don't want to
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, he wasn't going to take away, and that's why I believe also he initially said that he was pro Medicare for all, because he wasn't considering Medicare something that would be removed
for the entirety of his campaign. He did leave up the words Medicare for all. It just he said I support
the spirit of it.
Yeah, and then we need to move
towards 40,000 people losing their lives because they don't have health insurance.
and the bullshit that all Democrats agreed on this on the essence.
Pete Buttigieg is also Kamala Harris.
The whole thing with the Marianne Williamson and Andrew Yang debate that we covered, which was her essentially saying like you're refusing to call this what it is, which is criminal corruption at the expense of human life, and that's the difference of their politics. And obviously we can get into that. And of course Andrew Yang is a subject in and of himself. That's a debate in and of itself. And I think we both agree that Andrew Yang is a mixed bag. On one hand, he was the only one advocating for all drugs to be legal. Not even Bernie Sanders would take that step.
Yeah.
And the other, really innovative.
One of the things that made me initially excited about Andrew Yang was I thought that because he was making a lot of bold declarations.
And he has some really innovative policy ideas. When it comes to like, him having a seat at the table, I think he would be welcome there just as far as innovation goes. And he does have a really, I think, smart mind when it comes to crafting policy that, like he said, is human-centered. And, some more socialist people give him shit for the whole, human-centered capitalism thing. But essentially, that's what Bernie Sanders' program was, too. Essentially, that's what the program of democratic socialism is human-centered capitalism. Call it what you want, but
it's pacified capitalism.
Yeah, neither Bernie Sanders or, FDR, any of these people, none of them are getting rid of capitalism. They're merely making it more palatable. So I think this critique of UBI that it's kind of like just a Band-Aid on the system or whatever, I think you could apply that to Medicare for All or a Green New Deal or any of these
Medicare for All and Green New Deal as they currently exist, which is, and people in the Green Party, I think would be quick to note, especially the Green New Deal, which has, definitely evolved from the way that it was initially envisioned.
Yeah, it's been watered down a bit, and the unfortunate thing is that even in its watered down form, Joe Biden and the Democrats won't embrace it or even really support it. As we saw in the debate the other night, Joe Biden basically said, "I beat the socialist. I'm not championing the Green New Deal. I don't support the Green New Deal." Which is hilarious.
It's not like Bernie Sanders was running on a national healthcare system, which I think would be if we're just discussing our personal views. Obviously I support Medicare for All because of its political I obviously I think it's would be an obvious tremendous step for the American people to have access to free at the point of service healthcare, however it's delivered to them. But obviously, if we're moving towards an ideal system, you have to cut out the profit motive from the healthcare system, just like you have to cut out the profit motive from the housing industry, the housing market. You have to cut out the profit motive from food. You have to cut out the profit, and that's what I think is still part of a generational divide. And not to be the kind of young person that's like old people don't get it, because there are plenty of older people who've been fighting for this shit for decades. Yeah, but Bernie Sanders being even Bernie Sanders wasn't advocating for like complete socialization, and I think that as Bernie Sanders kind of perked all these young people's minds, which I think we do have to credit him for. It made everybody realize, wait, if we can do this, can't we also just do it like this and then save even more money for the people and take the profit motive out even more? And I think that that's what we owe Bernie Sanders a lot is waking people up to that idea that, no, you really can do all these like big ideas and look at all these other countries that are doing it. And
that's what I credit Andrew Yang for as well. Despite some of my disagreements with Yang, and I wouldn't necessarily have crafted a UBI in the way he did. I don't necessarily agree with all of the provisions of it, but we have to remember that Andrew Yang did not invent the concept of a UBI. He just kind of realized that it was due for a resurgence in popularity because our government has failed its most vulnerable communities so miserably just when it comes to providing like a decent economic safety net. So Andrew Yang, he didn't obviously he didn't win the nomination or anything, but I do think you have to give him credit for not just popularizing the idea of a UBI, but popularizing the idea of a welfare state in general, something that Americans in particular are totally brainwashed against the notion of. Propaganda from the capitalist interests have been pickling the minds of Americans for decades as far as the welfare queens and the welfare state and the handout and all this terminology. Andrew Yang undeniably changed a lot of people, especially in the working class, especially people in rural areas that probably were conservatives, people that were even Trump supporters. He really did change a lot of minds as far as rethinking the way that government can work for you, the way that money, trickles up and down, subsidies. He talked about we were subsidizing the automation industry. Why the fuck should we not be taxing them a small percentage to give people a basic income? And in my vision, it shouldn't stop with the automation industry. Any industry that, could be considered, a rapacious capitalist industry, but that has to continue for, let's be honest, most of these industries are going to have to continue whether we like it or not, for the foreseeable future. And if they are, I think they should at least be taxed, and that money could be redistributed. I mean, like what we see in Alaska with their oil industry, you know?
Yeah, I 100% think that that's the case, but I also think that we should rethink what kind of capacity we have to, really make systemic level change as far as automation is concerned. I don't think that we can, I don't think that we need to at least stop at okay, let's tax a percentage of these companies. I think what we should do is, start envisioning, okay, automation as a human species should be the greatest gift, right? It should not be a source of fear or anxiety, right? As long as we're not, polluting the earth and causing any, irreversible damage with our automation, it should actually come as a tremendous blessing to the all people, so that people can free up their own time and free up their, to pursue other things, so that we're not, tied down to these jobs that we hate, which is also one of the reasons why I'm skeptical also to join the party of jobs guarantee, right? Obviously, I think that we should move entirely towards, decoupling wealth or not wealth per se. That's the wrong way of putting it. The ability to survive and sustain oneself from your workplace productivity. And I think that mechanical automation gives us that path.
Yes. And I think that's exactly correct. And something that I find ironic about a lot of the arguments against UBI, because the detractors of UBI often paint it as a sort of like inhibitor to major structural reform. But I find that ironic, because one of the earliest recorded visions of a UBI was actually in the 16th century, Thomas More's work of fiction called Utopia, which depicted a society in which every person receives a guaranteed income. And ultimately, I think that's what UBI is the pathway to. It is the first step towards a utopian society. And to me, a utopian society is, first and foremost, a population unshackled from an obligation of labor. And I think one of the greatest sicknesses on our society is the dependence and insistence on human labor, insistently, day after day, 5 days a week, from 9 to 5. I think mindless
labor for some people. I mean, people are working 2-3 jobs. I mean, there are people who are working 12, 13 hours every single day, no days off.
Yeah, and these jobs, they're the bane of people's existence. It's not just like these jobs prevent people from pursuing their dreams. And, despite the capitalist propaganda, which insists that there's like this inherent value attached to having a job, a sense of honor and purpose that comes with vocation, maybe this is true for some people, but it's definitely not true for everyone. It's not true for me. I hate having to adhere to like a schedule or report to a boss, et cetera, especially if it's not a job that I, am interested in or, want to do. And, the concept of work has been so perverted now in our capitalist system to, basically just meaning what is profitable. Woodwork, painting, artistry, really of any form, are just basically considered hobbies in our society, because unless you're at an elite level of skill, they're not profitable enough to live off of. So Americans basically just give up on their dreams and spend their lives settling for menial labor instead of pursuing their passions. And I think a UBI is probably the first and most important step as far as changing the way people think about their lives in a very fundamental way.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, for sure. One of the concerns that I have is, I think we've talked about the French economist Thomas Piketty on the show before. He's a pretty influential economist. I'm sure a lot of people listening are familiar with him. He wrote books like Capital in the 21st Century. He's a really, influential thinker in France and all around the world. But he's really been pushing this idea that, essentially what's going to happen is that we're going to regress economically back to the sort of 18th, 19th century economic wealth divide, where if you look at a place like England, it's structured like Pride and Prejudice, right? Where you have these massive estates of people who don't work, and it's considered totally like to have a job or do anything that, it was totally unposh to have a job at that time period. And then you have there's no middle class, there's only the lower class, right? So it's upper and lower class, and there's a steep drop. There's a tremendous economic divide. And it's not so much that there's a caste system, it's just that there's all of the wealth is up here, and then there's no wealth down here. And so you have people who are, essentially like sharecropping the land for these, lords and, extremely wealthy people. And that's his prediction, is what's going to happen in the United States and Europe over the next 100 years. And it's going to be much more life. It's going to be a genetic lottery. It's going to be about, your inherited wealth. And I'm worried about how I almost feel like without taking these other steps before UBI, but without taking these major steps to prevent that from happening, that UBI almost fans that flame. Because if you give people $1,000 a month, you're still not fixing the problem of dramatic wealth inequality because you're not changing the percentage of ownership.
That is fair, and I agree that broad structural reform is extremely necessary. However, I'm also I'm a leftist because I believe in helping people that need it, and I think as much as we want to pass these policies, I think the more realistic way to get people help immediately right now, people are starving on the streets literally right now, is to give them money. And I mean, just like we believe, just like I think that housing is a right is the answer to homelessness. I think guaranteed income, an income is a right, is the way to end poverty. I think
that it would just have to be really substantial then.
Well, I mean, look at it this way. Healthcare shouldn't be tied to your employment. Housing shouldn't be tied to your employment. I don't think income should be either. I think you choose to work for more income, but I think you should have a modest income, a livable income. Maybe not. 1,000 minimum. That was Andrew Yang's idea, but I would go.
Yeah, I feel like this, in order to really solve a lot of these issues, it would have to be a much more substantial number, and we can afford a much more substantial number. I mean, I know a lot of Andrew Yang's numbers was about like going on Dave Rubin's show and talking about how like, oh no, this isn't that expensive, but if from a socialist perspective, we can afford a lot more.
American public, let's be honest, it wasn't just Dave Rubin he had to convince. A lot of people were, not aware, had no idea of this idea. A lot of people still don't. It's a mind-blowing concept.
But I'm saying that if you're going to not finance it with a regressive tax, like a value-added tax, which was Andrew Yang's proposal, and instead you're going to finance it with, estate taxes and, trade taxes on trades that occur on the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ, and, basically taxing the wealthy in different ways that it's not going to fall back on the consumer class.
Yeah.
Then I think you make it much more robust in a way that it would not be something that, oh, my landlord isn't going to just like raise my rent and then take care of, oh, there goes my UBI, basically. Like, you know what I mean? If we're talking like every American is entitled to, 2 checks every month, $1,400 untaxed. Like that's something where I'm like, okay, you can live off of, $3,000 a month. That's where, okay, you can buy groceries, you don't have to stress, you can have a car, you can that. And I think that that is the kind of way we should vision automation, is like, how does automation pay for it at that level on top of decoupling rent and healthcare and things like that. I just think that without that piece first, and I think that you don't get that level of UBI, and I don't think you get that level of basically social safety net without workplace democracy, without and if not workplace democracy, surely we have to change the way that we finance elections and fundamentally change how judicial review is conducted in this country, because the bench would strike down. I'm not convinced the bench wouldn't just strike down UBI. Like, we don't know with this new ruling.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a separate question for sure. And also another big piece of this that I don't think should ever be excluded from the conversation is raising the minimum wage. Switzerland just raised its wage to $25 an hour. I don't think there's any excuse why America shouldn't do the same.
Which was another thing that always perplexed me about Yang, because for whatever reason he wasn't down with raising the minimum wage.
That was one of my constant and hugest disagreements with Andrew Yang.
Like, why? It didn't make any sense to me. And none of the reasons that he gave ever felt like.
In my vision, the perfect UBI exists to supplement a robust wage, so you can literally live your life either, because some people do really thrive on productivity. There are people that want to work a 50-hour week and they love their job. That should be fine, and you should be able to make a lot of money doing that if you want. Or you should be able to kick back and work 20 hours a week and do whatever the fuck you want, and not to be stressed out and about to fucking commit suicide on the street of the fucking corner. You know what I'm saying? Like, we live in a society that is so, especially in America, that just values work and labor so much that I mean, people don't even consider that.
We value our employment a lot. Yeah, it's one of those weird things because we don't actually value work and labor. We don't pay our workers and laborers at all. But yeah, and it's also interesting how we like consider it's like totally like we do consider like a hard day's work like a very like American like thing. But like all the Americans that we think of as successful, like they're not doing hard day's work. They're just like fucking watching their fortunes grow. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
and how many people wait until they're retired to actually do things they want to do, to travel and stuff? Why is that? In part because of fucking Social Security. They're getting their Social Security checks. That's essentially UBI for old people. And in my opinion, that's all universal basic income is really expanding Social Security, an already universal program. And I mean, obviously not. It's not necessarily universal. It's what you pay into it. So I do think that UBI is different in that sense. I think everyone should probably get around the same amount of money to avoid it being coined a welfare.
Social Security is relatively regressively financed for sure.
No, there's no doubt some problems with Social Security, but at the same time, I don't know anyone that would give up their Social Security or anyone that would argue that it's harmful to the.
No, but I also don't know any old person that would say that you can live off of your Social Security check alone.
Yeah, but well, I think how many of them would think, oh, I can live better without it? I mean, I don't think it's.
I mean, that's true, but I don't think that's a choice that people should have to make.
Well, that's what I think. That's the choice of UBI. It's either you get it or you don't. I mean, that's what it comes down to. So, in the same way that no one would give up their Social Security, I don't think anyone would give up their universal basic income. It's a lifeline to. I mean, just because they're not seniors doesn't mean they're not equally in need of money. There's so many families across the country.
No, obviously that's the case. I mean, we're living in a country where 30 million people are relying on unemployment just to survive. Countless other people aren't even being considered as unemployed when they're making starvation wages. So I mean, we have a tremendous problem in this country, and I just worry that people are going to present UBI as this sort of like panacea for the issues that are plaguing our country, and I just think that if anything, it's going to play like one role. But we have to I think that it's really important to remember that if anything, it's one role. It's not a replacement for Medicare for all. It's not a replacement for in my view, workplace democracy. It's not a replacement for, housing as a right. All of these things that, obviously you and I agree with. I think that we have to make sure that we're never exchanging those kinds of things in our platform for something like UBI, because I think the oligarchic class will fold first on UBI. And so I'm worried that we get UBI and then we get nothing else, because yes, it will alleviate some suffering, but the amount of suffering that it alleviates will slowly dwindle over time as it, as the welfare state gets slashed, or whatever welfare system we have remaining. So I just worry about all those things, and that's what it made me skeptical about UBI.
That's totally fair, and like I've said, I totally understand those fears. I share those fears, frankly. I mean, if the wrong person were to institute UBI, I totally fear that it would be mismanaged and used as a replacement for very necessary social safety net program. That being said, given the corrupt and seemingly immovable Democratic Party, I also understand why people think that the fact that the oligarchs might fold on it is exactly the right reason to pursue it. Because if it's about getting help in the hands of the people that need it, if we can get a universal basic income, if that's an issue that Joe Biden could even potentially be pressured into accepting, he's already said he won't do Medicare for all. So, I mean, maybe if we can.
Why do you think Bernie never got behind UBI?
I think Bernie never got behind UBI is because he was constantly.
He was a little antiquated, like it was too new of an idea.
I don't think that. I think he probably agrees with the concept. I think it's that his entire campaign was characterized as free stuff. Bernie's going to give you free stuff. So adding $1,000 a month free, like I said, we live in a brainwashed society. We're in a little bit of a leftist, bubble here.
People need all of this shit if they're going to survive the 21st century.
So many people would have, looked at that and be like, oh, on top of free college and free healthcare and free weed.
No, 100%. It would have definitely. I just feel like people would have gotten over that if he'd. I don't know. I feel like if he'd focused on it, like he could have taken it away from Yang and maybe gotten Yang's support. And I don't know.
I wish he would have
been writing history in my brain, but
Andrew Yang said when he dropped out, he said, "I'll endorse whoever basically takes up UBI."
Tulsi.
Tulsi fucking tried to.
Tulsi immediately got behind UBI after he dropped out.
Ever
dude, it was really cringy. Actually, speaking of Tulsi Gabbard, she's been a cringe machine recently.
She's been increasingly so. Yeah. But Yeah, so I mean, yeah, maybe Bernie should have picked up the policy. I don't know, but then again, it could have hurt him, especially in those more conservative southern states that he already wasn't doing well in. You know, like I said, if you add another policy like that to a campaign that's already been dogged with accusations of you're the free stuff guy. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of the Democratic electorate is still very stuck in those ways. It's still very informed by cable news, what's considered in the bound of discussion.
Yeah, and I totally share your sentiment that depending on which party and platform is running on UBI. So like we've talked about in the past, the Movement for a People's Party has largely considered UBI as a potential platform that'll be voted on whenever the People's Party actually has a convention. And I don't imagine that any of the people that would be running the People's Party would be willing to fold on something like the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, housing as a human right. In exchange for something like UBI. However, so in that way, I'm sympathetic to it because I do think it provides practical relief immediately, and I don't want to leave the impression that I'm in any way like opposed to direct cash stimulus, because I think that Americans are incapable of making their own decisions 100%. I worry that because for anybody who's ever been in a situation where like you don't have fucking money, like the only thing that your brain is thinking about is how do you get cash, because then you can start like trying to put your life back together. And then what the bait and switch would be, instead of getting $1,300 worth of social services every month, you're getting $1,000 cash. So you're in net getting less government services anyway. And then, and then other things start to get shut down. So I just worry about all that.
Yeah, no, that is a very fair concern. And like I said, I mean, everyone from Milton Friedman to Martin Luther King Jr. has advocated.
Yeah, exactly. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah. And it really, depending on who were to implement it, it would be, take a different form. And it could.
Obviously, I don't think MLK was going to run, or wasn't going to constitute a society where people, didn't have access to healthcare unless they had, a calorie.
Yeah. MLK was a capitalist plant trying to ensure the wealth of the fucking Silicon Valley oligarchs. But that was definitely a nuanced conversation. And I do wish that I go back and forth on how I feel about Yang, because part of me is like, I do think some of his the way he described his policies, I think it was somewhat necessary in order to get the people on board that weren't on board. But then again, I mean, I just disagree with a lot of the way he structured his policies.
Yeah, I think that I can't really tell, and this is another thing that I go back and forth on. I can't tell if I honestly I think he actually probably really does. Like he probably really thinks this is the solution to the problem. But it's kind of like he's in They Live and he's got his like glasses on, kind of like how we all have our ideological glasses on, and like through the prism that he views the world, like this, shit, what was the name of the Venture for America? That was the name of the organization that he founded. And it's funny, when I was doing my stint in business school, I actually knew some people that were in Venture for America. Yeah. And basically what it is fresh out of college, you go to a town like Detroit, Austin, Texas, Columbus, Ohio, whatever. They give you $55,000 a year, so you're already in that, like, basically the highest economic fucking status if you live in Detroit and you make, like you're 22 years old and now you make like, obviously not the highest economic status, but you know what I mean? You're doing financially very well in an economically, starved. And he was like, okay, all these smart people are going to fix the problems here. And then obviously that didn't fucking work. So I think that he just views the world through a very capitalist innovator's lens, through a very like Silicon Valley lens. And I am very reluctant to get on board with any of those kinds of ideas, because I just think that the poison can't be the antidote. You can't innovate yourself out of the like evils and undoings of capitalism, right? Because I think you have to fundamentally restructure society so that wealth itself is no longer concentrated. And I think you have to start talking about percentages and not, a specific dollar amount. Like, what percentage of the GDP is going to be allocated to social safety, taking care of people domestically? What percentage of, that net tax, like, you know what I mean? I think we have to start thinking a lot broadly about how we're going to redistribute wealth. Why in an age of automation are a certain class of people who are not fucking doing anything going to retain all of the profits. That doesn't make any sense. If I have a machine that's going to crank out cars automatically, guess what? I don't need to keep all the fucking money from that. Like, it's going to become painfully obvious to people, especially as our world starts to fall apart, resources become scarce. You can't have it all. Not everybody can, have it all. So we either are going to have to make a decision where we're going to have 10 people have all of the stuff, or we're going to all share it.
Yeah.
And I think that's just where we are.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to stuff like environmental protections, that's like one of my big things. It's like those things need to be called out directly and, stopped, essentially. Like there is no fixing that, or like you said, innovating around it. Like that is an example of pure profit-driven catalist evil.
And also, when you think about it, we're subsidizing it. We're subsidizing the destruction of our planet for the tune of billions of dollars.
Yep. And that's one of those
money, with taxpayer money that we don't fucking have to give to the government to pay for fucking petroleum.
Yeah, or like what's going on
the streets because they don't have health insurance.
And that's another thing with Yang, when it came to environment, also when it came to foreign policy, he definitely wasn't,
there
of, the military industrial complex of American intervention and imperialism. Like, Andrew Yang is not someone that's truly like of the left necessarily. He just had some really good ideas that fall in the lefty fold. And to be fair, he was way fucking better than pretty much anyone the DNC was pushing. He was way fucking better than anyone else at the convention, and they didn't even invite him to the convention or let him talk about UBI.
I think that people underestimate how much his personality and just his overall likability as a guy. When you were listening to him talk, he sounded like a great guy that you would want to talk to.
If the Democrats weren't fucking stupid, if the Democrats weren't fucking stupid, they would have embraced Andrew Yang and tried to make him their nominee, because he's someone that actually can sell their shitty ideas. And he
wouldn't have tried to overthrow the neoliberal order.
Exactly. Yeah. No, he's someone that actually would have worked with them, and he wouldn't actually have overthrown the system. But he would have made capitalism workable for a little bit longer, essentially. Which is in the best interest of the neoliberal order. If they weren't so fucking short-sighted, if they weren't letting climate destroy them, they could destroy the world. They could get a lot more long-term profits on green energy and all that kind of stuff, right? But capitalism is short-sighted because it's about instant short-term profits, and that's the problem with it, right? And that's what Andrew Yang, failed to call out. And but like I said, then again, I think he introduced a lot of policies. And in the discussion of Democratic politicians, like I said, he at least was, introducing ideas that would put help in the hands of people that need it, addressing issues that, he
wasn't offering them fucking nothing like Joe Biden, which I think is, obviously something to say.